Hello, folks. Today I'm going to talk about a very serious subject. It may go on for a while, but it is something that needs to be out there. Feel free to share. I'm talking about the dangers that children face in the martial arts and those that would prey upon them. This is definitely not for children, but it is meant to help save children. The problem of those that prey upon children in the martial arts is very understated. It is kept under wraps for reasons I will go into later. But uh, you probably are not aware just how bad the situation is percentage wise. Okay, I want to say percentage wise. You go to, you get up like 10 schools, a significant number of them have problems with people preying on children in them. Why isn't this more well known? Well, there's a few factors. Let me go through this. First of all, uh, I said percentage wise. In terms of numbers, martial arts schools are kind of low. Think about a radius, okay? A radius around your house, 5 miles, 10 miles if you're in Canada, 10 clicks. And think about how many martial arts studios you know of inside that radius. And then compare that number with, say, insurance salesmen or stores that sell hardware or restaurants, okay? So, in terms of numbers, there's not that many martial arts studios per se in an area. I'm talking about percentages of them having problems. Another thing is that if you if you're in an area, you know, let's say I'm in Colorado Springs, I get the Colorado Springs newspaper, I watch the Colorado Springs news. If something goes on in Denver, which is an hour and a half away, I probably will not hear about something like problems in a martial arts studio unless it's very horrendous. So it's all local news. And again, as I said, the number of schools in your area is probably pretty low. Add to that the fact that most of us will notice something on the news and then like 2 days later it'll be gone. I mean, there might have been a dozen or so stories about changes in accounting laws in my state that I've read over the last year. But since I don't do accounting, I'm not an accountant, they went in one ear and went out the other. So you probably just, unless you're actually in martial arts now, if you're just starting to find a place for your child in martial arts, you probably have read a few stories but just forgot about them. And lastly, this is my theory. Okay, I'm just going to put this as a theory. No matter what you think about journalists, some people think they're scum of the earth, and some people, don't. And no matter what type of journalist, I mean, we're talking about left-wing MSNBC or right-wing Fox News. Journalists generally want to do the right thing for kids, and I think they kind of do not put a lot of attention on things, not because they want to sweep it under the rug and let these guys get away with it, but because they don't want to make it too obvious on identifying the victim. If the story about a scandal at these martial arts schools hits the front page every day and is a lead story in the news at night, pretty soon the kids at the local elementary school might start figuring out that that's the same school that little Mary went to before she started crying a lot and withdrawing from everyone. So it's my theory that they'll put the story on page 7 or 25 minutes into the news broadcast, and they'll only cover the basics. They won't do, like if there's a mass shooting, they'll do the story and then they'll do follow-on stories on the mental breakup of the person, or tribute to the victims. Just the bare bones in terms of the cases involving children in these things. From my observation, that's my theory. So you don't hear it too much, but again, if you start looking for it, you start seeing a lot, and it really is really disturbing. Let me start out by saying, how did I get into this? I mean, I've got a reputation of somebody that fights for children, and I didn't come here directly. I lived in Japan 15 years, and I was there at like what you could call the dawn of the popular internet age. I mean, I was on AOL when AOL was cool. And there really wasn't much out there, for people to talk about martial arts except for the AOL message boards. And as I said, I was in Japan at the time, and of course, you can imagine how people back then, early days, was like, oh, there's someone here from Japan. We can ask them questions about the language, the history, and all that. So I got a reputation of someone that could, help out with like translating something, or knowing stuff, or telling people if they were coming to Japan when to come and all that. Then we started seeing a lot of people that were coming on and trying to impress them. Now they're great martial artists and they have these teachers and all that. A lot of them were saying, like, I've got a teacher in Japan, you know, all that, and red flags were going up, and everyone was asking me, and so I kind of came forward and like, in some cases, I'm like, oh well, so your teacher or your organization in Japan, I've never heard of it, but if you give me some information, I'll go out, talk to them, confirm it, and then people will give you less grief. Rarely worked out that way. I also had the ability to like shoot down stories because people were coming up with names like Yusaka Hasaka, not a Japanese name, but sounds kind of like it if you don't know the language. So I got kind of a reputation as a fraud buster, and boy, did I get a lot of enemies. I have got a few dozen people that want me dead. Anyways, so from there, it kind of went laterally to where I am now, where I am considered an advocate for children. As it turns out, a lot of these people that had these mysterious teachers, and that nobody else ever saw martial arts, a hell of a lot of them had an interest in children that is not nice at all. And it makes sense when you think about it. Okay, if you're a predator, you go where the prey is. Okay, so children is what you hunt. Where do you go? Well, oh, more specifically, where do you go where you can be alone with children for the most part, outside their parents' view? Yeah. One obvious is public schools, but think about the problems with that. First of all, you're going to have to go through a few years of college to be able to teach. They don't want to do that. They want to do it like right now. Secondly, public schools tend to have like programs and things set up that, if a teacher notices disturbing behavior from another colleague, they can report it, it can be investigated, it can be taken care of, okay? Too much scrutiny for that. So instead, the second best is probably martial arts because so many parents take their kids to the classes, drop them off, come back later. And there's interactions and you actually can be physically touching people. If you've ever heard of the pickup artists, they've got what they call kino. Getting a girl to like you, you can go out with you. You touch them as much as possible. Martial arts is an excellent chance to do that. So yeah, so I kind of started getting pulled into these things because a lot of these frauds were also, doing things to children. I remember an early case back on a message board called eBudo. This was back before the dark days, before the Zuckerberg, and when there was independent websites for the most part. And there was this group called Konigun, headed by a guy named Bryce Dallas. And of course, their story stunk to heaven about being a Christian ninja organization organized in the 11th century, something like that. And, there were debates. We started exposing them, and Bryce sent some of his senior instructors onto eBudo to try to argue that he was, that we were wrong and that this was legit. And I'm there and I'm in the midst of it along with a lot of other people. By this time, there was a lot of people living in Japan that could actually, answer these questions. We used to get together in Shinjuku and drink a lot. And, we started like really shooting these people down. And I remember, they gave me credit because I started telling people, yeah, you're saying that. This is what Bryce Dallas told you. Bryce Dallas is not here because he knows this is false. And what you are saying is exactly what he said. But I'm going to tell you right now, when you go back to Bryce, he's going to say, no, you heard me wrong. I wasn't wrong. What they said was incorrect because what you told them was incorrect. What I said was something else. And that's exactly what happened. And as it turned out, there was a lot of people in this cult, for it was a cult, that were looking around and seeing things that disturbed them, but they thought they were the only ones seeing it. And because of this, the guys that were being sent on to eBudo started getting together, comparing notes, and as a result, like a huge portion of this group just left and abandoned Bryce. And they left, and the cult was basically like 1/10, I think, of what it was. Only a few people sticking around, the ones that were the worst, the ones that were actually doing things. And one of the things that really, this was like a turning point for me because one of these guys that I've been arguing with, a while later sent me a note, and it turns out he had a special needs child that was being abused by Bryce for years. And as long as her father was part of this group, she was afraid to come forward. But now that he had left, she was felt free to open up to him, and of course at that point the abuse stopped. And yeah, okay, so I really can't forget that. I mean, that's the thing, is that when you look into the eyes of these victims, when you talk to them, I mean, I've talked with people that have been violated. It's not easy, but you really can't turn your back on that, no matter how hard it is or how many people attack you in various ways. I can't really you know walk away just because it's hard, just because people are trying to make it hard. And as it is, I am not someone that makes my living off of teaching. I do not teach children, and I can speak my mind. I can speak the truth. I do not, you know, I'm not going to lose penny one if people decide not to train with me. I do not, put food on my table through teaching. So I am a lot more free to just basically tell people to go jump in the lake. Yes. So, uh, yeah. Now, there's a lot of problems with martial arts. And again, why aren't we saying this? Why aren't we hearing more of this? One of the problems is that there are big professional organizations that help people market and sell their stuff. They how to organize classes, how to market your stuff, programs, all that. These big groups, they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to slit their own throats. If people really understood the problem with martial arts and child abuse, they'd lose a lot of people. So they're not going to talk about it. They kind of have the attitude that, well, I don't do that, so why should I, drive people away? And yeah, that's it. If you've got a storefront school, if you want to make a living, if you want to have a storefront school, like in a strip mall or something like that, your bread and butter is basically child's classes. And I'm going to go into detail here about a lot of things that I have problems with that. Yeah, I've known people that have taught professionally and then gave it up because they're disgusted. But yeah, if you go into a strip mall dojo, you're going to find a lot of child's classes, small amount of adult classes. So really, they attract a lot of kids and they have to keep those kids. You'll find contracts and all that, but there are some dangers there, okay? Um, Now, let me go on a side rant here about discipline, because that's the number one thing that parents send their kids to martial arts class. They want them to develop discipline. And I think that whole premise is kind of flawed. Um, I was asked once to teach a kid, and I ended up sending him away. My impression of that was basically the mother was, wanted discipline for her kid. Kid didn't really want to go to martial arts class, but the mother wanted him to have discipline. And that kind of outsourcing of something important like that's the problem. That's a basic problem. The type of person that wants somebody else to install those kinds of attitudes is they're probably starting out right there with a handicap. And so yeah, this is a thing. Now, I gotta say, if you want to install discipline in your kids, my suggestion is not martial arts, okay? Not just because of the dangers that they have, but just because, well, again, the kids' classes are the bread and butter, the foundation. They can't do without it. So no matter how, they talk about discipline, if the kid screams and yells and cries and I don't want to go, I don't want to go, and stops going, well, the parent's probably going to give in. They're going to lose a customer. That's less revenue. Can they really afford that? So who really has a power in that situation? The kid or the dojo? Think about it. Um, my experiences, on the other hand, with like violin teachers, both of my kids learned violin. Both of them are taking STEM in college right now. One of them is going for their doctorate. We are going to have a Dr. Rowley. I'm very proud of that. And yeah, uh, both of them started out with violin. Think about it. How many people that are like masters of their industry or areas started out as kids learning a musical instrument, like with the violin? You might not be able to place names, but you probably think, oh yeah, as a kid, this person studied the violin. They learn discipline. They have to. My experience with professional music teachers, that come, one on one, is that they've got a full, they've got a waiting list. Your kid doesn't want to practice, goodbye. They're going to get somebody else. If they're part of a, if you're lucky enough to be in an area that has a school that has a music program, the kids have to be part of concerts. And if they don't practice on their own, they let down the team, which is a big pressure. But the amount of self practice, which is, of course, a form of self discipline, is much greater with musical instruments, in my experience, than a professional dojo. Because the kids can go home and not do anything. They practice at the dojo, they don't practice at home for the most part. Another thing is that you can kind of tell when a kid is practicing musical instruments. You can hear it. You can also tell if they're getting better because you go to concerts and you can hear them during the practice. You can also tell if a music teacher knows what they're doing because you can tell good music from bad music, a good performance from bad performance. To be blunt, you probably do not know bad martial arts from good martial arts. You cannot look at someone and figure out that this person learned off of YouTube rather than decades of experience. So, as a parent, I would say that if you want to instill discipline in your kid, find a musical instrument like the violin or the guitar. If you want to install discipline and teach them to fight, teach them to play the accordion. Now, what about those kids that do want to practice martial arts and they're like, okay, in my experience, do not go to a professional dojo, one that you can find in a strip mall. Rec centers, garages, and stuff like that, you're going to find a little bit more freedom to scream at the kid. And if the kid doesn't practice, then, most likely say, okay, we're done. Now, a caveat. The type of person I'm talking about that gets into martial arts to have access to children are more likely to be the ones that teach out of the garage, parks, or rec centers. Okay, so do your diligence. It is far too easy for somebody to, make up a false story, then find some place that will recognize their rank and issue a certificate and whatever degree black belt that they want. And then they can send out checks and join organizations that will send them certificates to put on the wall and look impressive and look legit to most parents. I mean, what do you know? Difference between that and that. For that matter, all they need is a good printer and come out with, and there's templates online that they can use to come up with their own certificates. People tend to go with the online groups that, will recognize their ranks because they get their name put up on on a board or something like that a lot of the time. So if the parents like, okay, sensei such and such, oh, okay, here he is, a little confirmation there. You really got to do your diligence, and I want to stress this. If it's at like a rec center, take the kid to class and at least half the time sit there while they're training. Okay. Not only will you see the dynamic and kind of notice if the teacher's touching little Jane a bit too much, but you're showing an interest in your kid's progress. How do you think it feels to a kid that's just dropped off and left and the parents never sit around? That's a nice thing, again, about musical instruments is that the parents show up for the concerts. There's that support. I don't see that much support in professional martial arts classes. That has problems. Okay. But if you sit there and you watch the class, and again, when the kid's sitting around when somebody else is sparring, you've got your phone that you can kind of check up on things and all that. But show an interest, okay? Sit there and watch the class. I mean, I've got a friend that basically, that's his requirement. Every time they drop off the kid, they can't leave until the kid does. And you can imagine how that, A, raises the self-esteem of the kid, and two, really prevents any hanky-panky going on, okay? So that's basically the whole thing is, try to basically be part of your kid's life. Now, there's a problem. Again, I'm talking about one type of people that prey on children. There's another type that have problems with professional schools. And again, there's some people that get into martial arts and make fake claims so that they can have access to them. Then there's just the accidents, the ones that didn't mean to getting into martial arts, but end up in trouble. And, you're talking about like some guy that, spent like 15 years training in martial arts, gets into a junior instructor position or something like that, start teaching the kids classes because the main instructors are teaching the adults. And a 14-year-old starts this thing. Unfortunately, it is very common. Kids are being sexualized left and right. I mean, and again, they're coming into their hormones. They don't know what to think. They're not used to this. They're vulnerable, and they're interacting with people that have not really been trained. I mean, if you are a public teacher, you have probably had training. You've probably sat in on classes where they detail how, okay, the kid thinks this, but the kid's an idiot. Not we don't let them smoke for a reason. We don't let them make choices for their whole lives for a reason. We can show you the long-term psychological damage if anything happens. So the professional teachers in elementary school and middle school and all that get this training, and there's still cases, despite all the safeguards. The people in these professional schools, I mean, they might not know how to throw a punch, but they haven't gotten this training on just how bad it would be if they actually convince themselves, oh, she wants it. She's showing interest. So things happen, and again, the kid is scarred for life. You know, again, I taught, my first job in Japan was teaching English in public schools. And basically the answer to a 14-year-old giving you doughy eyes and cooing at everything you say is ignore them. Don't be alone with them. Treat them just like everyone else. Be a little bit distant from them. And considering that they're teenagers or younger, their attention span isn't all that great. Give it a few weeks, few months, they'll be chasing someone else. This is the way it is, but these people in these professional schools don't get it. They don't get that type of training. So I would never send a kid to a professional school like that. But unfortunately, parents are using these things as daycare. They drop the kids off, they pick them up. Some are starting where I am. There's already a school in my area that's got a little bus. They will come around, pick the kids up, take them to martial arts camp, and then the parents can pick them up after they finish work. These are basically daycare centers without the regulation or safety nets. Gee, what could go wrong? So there is that. And again, if you want, I've hoped I've given you ideas on how to avoid problems with your children in martial arts. But if I had to leave one thing with you in addition, it has been my observation that a lot of these kids that end up, in relationships with their teachers, again, they're dropped off by parents that want to shuffle them off to someplace else. They're lacking. They're looking for something that they're not getting at home. If your kid really had a lot of attention and love that they deserve at home, they wouldn't be as vulnerable when someone comes along and starts telling them how good they are, how praising what they are, when they're in a very vulnerable position. The light touches and such, correcting form on such, wouldn't have as much impact. Everyone's doing their best, I believe, but you've got to think about how to do the best rather than thinking that it will just happen. Take time for your kids. Let them know you're there for them, that they can tell you anything. No matter what anybody does to them, they can come to you. You love them, you support them, and you want what's best of them. And I think that is a start of keeping kids safe. Put your comments in the comments below. If you know of cases, please let me know. I might be able to follow them on. If you've got some insight, if you like this, like and subscribe. Feel free to share. I'd love to hear back to you. I really like hearing sometimes when I have made a difference in people's lives. So feel free, and please love your children.